Can these various approaches be used together? And how would that look like, right? So here's our reason for hope that maybe that can work its way out. So the first issue here is scripture as truth. And they tell us that while all four models view scripture as revealing truth from God, they differ in how they approach persuading non-Christians to accept that truth. For instance, classical apologists tend to view scripture as, they tell us, the subject of apologetics. And the purpose of apologetics, and from the classical perspective, is to present an argument that concludes with the divine argument or authority, rather, of truth and scripture. So the classical apologist attempts to kind of have as their conclusion, right, the divine authority of scripture. That's so scripture is the subject of the apologetics.
Right. So that would be them presenting the case that God exists, and then once you've done some version of that, then you switch over to your second point, which is Jesus is the complete fulfillment of that revelation. And then, is there any way that we can know these two facts better? And so Scripture is presented up as, well, since Jesus said that what he was going to do by dying and resurrected is the truth, then let's go to the source book that he believed in, he read from, and that ultimately he authored as well.
Exactly. Right. So that's kind of the classical approach. All right. What about the evidentialists? Well, they tell us that evidentialists seek to conclude that the argument in the same way, but they typically begin by viewing scripture as the source of apologetics. So what this means is their arguments use scripture as a historical source of facts or evidences from which the central claims of scripture concerning Jesus Christ can be defended, right? So they are looking at, here is the evidence, and the evidence that they take from the scriptures often. And so that's the basic idea here. The scriptures are the source. So the question is, how does what we're walking through then is how each approach deals with scripture as truth, right? So subject is truth, classical apologetics. Scripture is the source of the apologetics, evidentialist apologetics.
Right. And, the scriptures, for all that they could be, what they are, what unless if you're uber super skeptic that believes that they just came about in the year 500 or what have you, are still elements of history. And it's kind of amazing that people will devote their entire lives to the study of Homer to figure out kind of the Greco wars of the time, and still say, well, yeah, of course there are fanciful elements in there, but look at all we can learn from it. But when it comes to scripture, well, there's too many fanciful things there, so we just kind of have to throw it out or scoff at it and put it to the side and say, okay, you theologians can have it, but there's really nothing of value there. In fact, I was watching a documentary last night on Pompeii and Herculean, which is the lesser second city, and the scientists were so amazed because they actually found bones within the city of Herculean because Romans would burn their dead, and so they would never find skeletal remains of Romans, and these are the first and only Romans that they have, and so they're able to do all the fancy scholarship work of these bones. And they were
piece together what Romans look like, right?
And they were just so excited to see, like, oh, here are people with really good teeth, but here's also probably a slave girl who's protecting a child who's probably of the upper echelon, and it was fascinating to them, and so you just have here bones of an element of history that is really exciting. But when it comes to scripture, you have things like towns and people's values and how they work and how they live and their ethical dilemmas and their interaction between the Romans and the Jews. All these things are very helpful, and it just seems like it never gets its due because the skeptical version of this hoisted over to its side, or there's always got to be kind of a secondary element of poo-pooing scripture when it comes to the historicity. And so I think the evidentialists, of course, we're all using Scripture to promote something more than just history, but to completely fanciful it out of the common parlance of what's acceptable as proof. We don't do that for any other book out there, and so so that's my long-winded tooting of the horn for the evidentialists there as well. All right, well, how about the Reformed apologists? The Reformed apologists or presuppositionalists come into here, and especially in the tradition of Clark and Van Til, which, pick your camp there, but you don't have to here. They argue that Scripture should be viewed as the standard of apologetics. It lays down the theological basis and ground rules for apologetics. Agreed. And the apologist must present it at the Scriptures as the self-attesting authority or the standard for all truth, not just some of it, not just religious truth, but if it does what it says it should do and be taken as, what should Scripture be? Well, then it is the standard for not just salvation, but for all truth. If Jesus Christ is Lord of all, if God has made the world and made it a certain way, if he's has general and specific revelation, if he holds men all guilty before him, then all these things have conclusions already kind of drawn in the universe. And by reading Scripture, you are coming to it kind of at the last chapter. The book has already been written. In fact, literally the last chapter has already been written, and you're just a little bit behind in that category. And so you are bringing to the table not enough to fully justify all the knowledge that you think that you have. And so this is the standard for all truth. Well, how about the fetus? We can't forget the fetus. They might be the redheaded stepchild, but we're still including them in here, and we love them as well. And fetus view Scripture as the story of apologetics. So there's our four, and it should be it shouldn't be defended, but instead should be used to tell the self-attesting story of Jesus Christ himself.
Right, and so what we'll see over and over again as we work through this chapter and these various issues and the various positions is that really each position kind of comes from it from a different perspective. And so we can put all these perspectives together, as it were, or at least use the perspectives as we need them. And that's what we'll see as we work our way through this chapter. So they tell us that Reformed and classical apologetics both view Scripture as the authority to which apologetics points. And classical apologists can view his apologetic argument as helping people recognize Scripture as a divinely inspired and therefore self-attesting word as well, right? And so the presuppositional argument is itself a kind of rational validation. In other words, to argue that Scripture provides the only coherent or intelligible basis for affirming truth, meaning, or moral values in an indirect form of validation. So notice they're similar with regard to their argumentation is what they're trying to get at, but somewhat different perspectives.
Sure. And we're not trying to argue the case for it. We're just presenting what our authors are talking about here. So we could squabble, of course, but here I think where Scripture comes in is secondary for their attempts to kind of bring these four perspectives together, especially these two as well. Well, okay, how about evidentialism, fetism? Both of them emphasize Jesus Christ as the authority, right? So fetism is pretty obvious there, but evidentialism is saying, like, here, let's look at Scripture and see the truth that is uncovered here. And so, well, what about this miracle claim? Okay, well, we can look at that as evidence, but here's the authority. Jesus Christ is the authority, and Scripture is the primary as presenting the story of Jesus Christ. So that's what both of them are doing, the evidentialists and the fetus. Their difference parallels that between classical and Reformed apologetics. The evidentialist recounts as factually verifiable the story of one whose supernatural life was imminent in history, while fetus recounts as self-attesting the story of the one whose supernatural life transcends history. And both perspectives are true. And in fact, I would say that probably Reformed apologists would agree with that for the most part. Fetus claim that Jesus is his own best witness is not contradicted or undermined by appealing to factual evidences as secondary witnesses to Jesus.
Right. So Jesus could be his own best witnesses. In fact, he does. He says he kind of implies that, right? But he says, and I think in John he talks about, okay, this is my witness of myself, but also the Father witnesses to me, the Scriptures is witness to me, and so forth. And so they claim that Jesus is his own best witness. But notice, you can also appeal to factual evidence as secondary witnesses if you're a fetus, and therefore you can incorporate the evidentialist perspective in your argument. Right? That's the idea they're getting at.
Right. And so here, kind of, our authors are maybe shifting a little bit more, trying to shift out our apologetic statues and saying, listen, if you just kind of give a little bit here without undermining your entire system of values, you can incorporate more of these and understand maybe where other people are coming from, or maybe this is your own second step here that you can present as well. So that's what they're trying to do here. All right. Well,
so that's Scripture, right?
Yeah, absolutely.